Good evening and welcome to SkullNet 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski. Starting off, we have the Ukraine update, day 789 of a conflict. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged the US Senate to rapidly ratify the long-delayed military aid package passed by Congress over the weekend, warning that his country was preparing its defenses amid fears there could be a large Russian offensive before the fresh supplies reach the front line. Quote, "We really need to get this to the final point. We need to get it approved by the Senate so that we get some tangible assistance for the soldiers on the front line as soon as possible, not in another 6 months," he said. In the interview with the US television network NBC, Zelensky also said that Saturday's vote showed Ukraine would not be a second Afghanistan, which a pro-Western government whose pro-Western government collapsed during a US-led pullout in the summer of 2021. Zelensky said his immediate priorities were air defense systems, such as the US-made Patriots, and long-range missiles, such as ATACMS, which can travel up to 300 kilometers and which the House has called on the Pentagon to provide promptly. Russia said US lawmakers' support for another $61 billion in military aid for Ukraine showed that Washington was wading much deeper into a hybrid war against Moscow that would end in humiliation on par with the Vietnam of Afghanistan conflicts, or Afghanistan conflicts. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said it was clear that the United States wanted Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian, including with attacks on Russian sovereign territory and civilians. Ukraine's military said on Sunday it had struck and damaged a long-serving Russian rescue vessel in Sevastopol, the headquarters in occupied Crimea of Moscow's Black Sea Fleet. Navy spokesperson Dmytro Platenchuk said the vessel, the Komuna, has been hit in Sevastopol Bay on Sunday morning, and it was clear that the ship is no longer in a state to carry out assignments. On Sunday, Russia said its forces had gained territory near the key battleground of Chasiv Yar in East Ukraine, taking control of Bogdanivka, a small frontline village less than 3 kilometers, 2 miles northeast of the town. Moving on to our Israel and Gaza latest, at least 34,151 Palestinians have been killed and 77,084 wounded in Israel's military offensive on Gaza since the 7th of October. Gaza authorities say over 200 bodies have been recovered so far from a temporary mass grave at what is left of Nasser Hospital, which was besieged and raided by the Israeli troops. An independent review led by the former French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna has found that Israel is yet to provide any supporting evidence of its claims that the employees of the UN relief agency, UNRWA, are members of terrorist organizations. Israeli allegations of the involvement of UNRWA staff in the 7th of October Hamas attack on Israel, led by major donors in January to cut their funding to the agency. The head of the World Health Organization again called for safe passage for humanitarian aid missions through Gaza today, after an aid team failed to complete its most recent trip to the hard-hit northern Gaza. Doctors in Gaza have saved a baby from the womb of her mother as she lay dying from head injuries sustained in an Israeli airstrike. The girl was delivered via an emergency cesarean section at the hospital in Rafah. In a resignation letter, Aharon Haliva, the general in command of IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate on the 7th of October, has described the Hamas attack inside southern Israel as a black day that he has carried with him ever since. Jerusalem police say that they have arrested 13 settlers carrying lambs and goats, including one concealed in a shopping bag and another hidden in a baby carriage, as they attempted to access the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and sacrifice them as part of a religious ritual. Two suspects have been arrested after a car rammed into a crowd of ultra-Orthodox men on a Jerusalem street early Monday morning, wounding three. Israeli forces conducted raids across the Israeli-occupied West Bank early today, wounding a man in the Balata refugee camp and detaining at least 25 more, according to the Palestinian Prisoners Society. Overnight, the Israeli armed forces have said that one of their drones, which was staging an incursion inside Lebanon's airspace, had been taken down by a surface-to-air missile. An initial account of an exchange between a police officer and an anti-Semitism campaigner adjacent to the pro-Palestinian demonstrations that sparked heavy criticisms of London's police did not show the full picture, a former senior official has said. Now, for the UK, where the Rwanda bill was in the House of Commons today, the Conservatives' Rwanda bill faced votes on amendments in the House of Commons today, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak stating that flights to Rwanda will set off in 10 to 12 weeks. The Rwanda bill plans to send some amount of asylum seekers to Rwanda and have their claims processed there, acting as a deterrent on boat crossings and easing the amount of processing faced by the UK. The bill has been successfully voted on in the House of Commons before, but has been delayed by legal challenges from the Supreme Court and amendments from the House of Lords. The amendments being voted for today asked the Commons to decide whether Rwanda can be deemed a safe country, and if Afghan interpreters who assisted British troops will be granted an exemption from deportations to Rwanda. Both amendments failed their votes in the Commons, and MPs voted to set up a Reasons Committee that will be responsible for sending a message to the Lords explaining why their amendments got rejected. Glasgow Central SNP MP Alison Fulis denounced the bill, saying the following.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the Minister opened by saying that he had looked forward last week to not debating this bill. Well, I wish indeed that the bill had never been brought to this House in the first place and that we wouldn't have to debate this bill. I wish that it had never seen the light of day. And if he never wanted to debate it again, he could have, of course, accepted the Lords' amendments last week instead of stringing this out for even longer, because these are perfectly legitimate amendments that the Lords have brought. But I see that the members on the benches opposite are seeking to get around the tedium of voting on amendments to render vulnerable people overseas. There's a text message circulating on X in the name of the Government Chief Whip saying, "Dear colleagues, with a potentially long and historic night ahead, on behalf of the Prime Minister, I would like to invite you to drinks this evening from 9:30. These will take place in the Prime Minister's office in the House of Commons. I look forward to seeing you there." How absolutely heartless and despicable that the members in the opposite benches are quaffing drinks while they're thinking about sending people to Rwanda. How utterly without any kind of moral background whatsoever. And should the Lords send back further amendments tonight, should they carry out the procedural, unusual procedural matter of double insistence, I would certainly support them very much in that endeavour. Any mechanism that we can use in this place to stop this bill is what we should do. I will.
I thank the honourable friend for giving way, and I congratulate her on using every procedure that is available to her to state the SNP's opposition, not least, Madam Deputy Speaker, by moving amendments in the Reasons Committee last week, because we in the SNP will take every single opportunity to express our opposition to this outrageous plan.
I thank him for his intervention and would note on the record that Labour did not vote on any of the reasons that I sought to amend in the Reasons Committee, and I've yet to have any explanation as to why they wouldn't use any mechanism available to them to oppose this bill. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, we had yet another press conference this afternoon where the Prime Minister didn't come to this House to talk about his gurning and his greeting that those mean old Lords wouldn't let him have his way. And I would point out that the Conservatives have over 100 more Lords than Labour, and perhaps a lack of enthusiasm from their own Lords is reflective of the fact that many of them didn't even show up to vote last week. because this is not in the Conservative Party manifesto. They have no mandate for the Rwanda plan whatsoever, and indeed, what manifesto would they put in front of people which would say we're going to set out to breach our international commitments and engage in state-sponsored people trafficking? What manifesto indeed would that be? And just to mention very briefly, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the things that the Prime Minister mentioned in his statement, suddenly conjuring up a whole load of judges to determine these cases, when they could be better served, perhaps, looking at the appeals backlog that his incompetent bulk processing of asylum claims has created. He mentioned charter flights being booked. Well, many commercial companies had refused to be involved in the charter flights at all, including the Rwandan state carrier. So which companies have been engaged to do this, and at which cost? We still don't know. He said that the first flight will leave in 10 to 12 weeks. Will this be before or after we reach summer recess? Because we know already how far the timescale has slipped for the government on this, and what scrutiny will occur should these flights take off during recess. Madam Deputy Speaker, if they do indeed manage to send anybody to Rwanda, where are they going to put them? Because we know that the Rwandans have sold off the housing that they set up to place people in. Will they be piling them up in tents? I wouldn't put it past this government, but it would be useful to know. Moving to the Lord's amendments themselves, Madam Deputy Speaker, we fully support these Lord's amendments, which do their very best to mitigate an absolutely dreadful piece of legislation. And I cannot see what the government's objection really ought to be in Amendment 3G. They were all about taking back control, but yet they want absolutely no parliamentary scrutiny whatsoever of whether Rwanda remains a safe country. And the honourable member from Kenilworth and Southam quite rightly pointed out, we have no means in this place of declaring Rwanda unsafe. We say it's safe for in perpetuity, forever and ever and ever. We can't declare it unsafe should something happen. That is just not logical. And I would note also that the Irish High Court ruled last month that the UK, in fact, is not a safe country to send asylum seekers to in light of these plans. I fully support also the new Amendment 10F from the Lords regarding Afghans. And I've mentioned it many times before, my support for those Afghans who served and supported UK objectives in Afghanistan, and how woeful the government's response to the need of those people has been. And I would point... I will briefly, yes.
I'm grateful to her for giving way. Would she agree with me that rather than spending £11,000 per person to deport them to Rwanda, that money could be used right now to rescue my constituent and his wife, who got out of Afghanistan into Pakistan and are now stuck there waiting for the UK government to rescue them?
I wholeheartedly agree, and I know of many such cases of people who have been sorely let down by this government. And would note that the figures that the government brought out this morning, that there has been an increase in small boat arrivals this past 3 months compared to last year. So it's hardly any kind of deterrent if people are still coming over in small boats in their droves. But I would note amongst them were 1,216 Afghans, an increase on the 1,098 that came in the same period last year. If he thinks the Afghan schemes are such a roaring success, why are so many Afghans being forced onto small boats just to get to safety? Many of them will have family in this country. Many of them will not have been able to avail themselves of the Afghan schemes he so talks up. And many of them will not have been able to use family reunion, which is an existing safe and legal route which many people are not able to access. Madam Deputy Speaker, in light of time, I will not go further into the detail of some of the Afghan cases I wished to raise. But I will say this to this government. This legislation is utterly despicable. It is state-sponsored people trafficking. It is against our obligations in international law, and Scotland wants no part of it. We will oppose it every step of the way.
That was the Glasgow Central SNP MP Alison Fulis denouncing the Rwanda bill. If this story further develops during the duration of our broadcast, we will bring them straight to you. But currently moving on, we have a report warning that high UK interest rates could add billions to the green energy transition. The Resolution Foundation has warned that a permanent shift to higher interest rates could add billions of pounds to the UK's renewable energy transition. Borrowing costs have soared since the easing of pandemic lockdowns, And actually, updates from the Lords right now. We're going to switch the broadcast over today. House of Lords discussing Rwanda bill.
My Lords, consideration of Commons reasons on the safety of Rwanda asylum and immigration bill. Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I beg to move that the Commons reasons be considered forthwith.
The question is that the Commons reasons be considered forthwith. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Contrary not content, the contents have it. Motion A, Lord Sharp of Epsom.
My Lords, I beg to move motion A that this House do not insist on its amendment 3G, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 3H. I will also speak to motions B and B1. My Lords, I'm very grateful to noble Lords on all sides of the House for the careful consideration of this bill. It is important that we have such detailed debates, and the bill has been scrutinised to the extent it has, but we must now accept that the will of the elected House and get this bill onto the statute book. My Lords, turning to the amendment in the name of the noble Lord Hope. Having now debated this issue on so many occasions, I will not repeat the same arguments, but I will remind your Lordship's House of a key point of which I'm sure by now you are fully aware. The bill's provisions come into force when the treaty enters into force, and the treaty enters into force when the parties have completed their internal procedures. My Lords, we will only ratify the treaty in the UK once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. And I refer to the noble and learned Lord Hope's remarks during our debate on the 20th of March, where the noble Lord set out, I want to make it plain that I do not for a moment question the good faith of the government of Rwanda when they entered into the agreement or when they seek to give effect to what the treaty says. I do not for a moment question their determination to fulfil the obligations that they are undertaking. My Lords, the government entirely agrees with this sentiment. The noble Lord was right not to question the determination of the Rwandan government to fulfil the obligations that they are undertaking. Their commitment to the partnership and their obligations under the treaty have been demonstrated by the progress they are making towards implementation. And I set out last week the recent steps that have been taken to implement the treaty, and I don't intend to repeat those again. But I am pleased to be able to confirm further progress. On the 19th of April, the Rwandan Parliament passed their domestic legislation to implement their new asylum system. The new Rwandan asylum law will strengthen and streamline key aspects of the end-to-end asylum system, in particular decision-making processes and associated appeals processes. I'll also remind noble Lords of the role of the Independent Monitoring Committee, which, as you will now by all be aware, has been enhanced under the terms of treaty to ensure compliance in practice with the obligations under the treaty. The Monitoring Committee will have the power to set its own priority areas for monitoring. It will have unfettered access for the purposes of completing assessments and reports, and the ability to publish these reports as it sees fit. They will monitor the entire relocation process from the beginning, including initial screening, to relocation and settlement in Rwanda. Crucially, the Monitoring Committee will undertake daily monitoring of the partnership for at least the first 3 months to ensure rapid identification of and response to any shortcomings. And as we have made clear, if the Monitoring Committee were to raise or escalate any issues to the Joint Committee, where standing members of the Joint Committee are senior officials of the Government of the UK and the Government of the Republic of Rwanda, with responsibility for areas related to the partnership, or areas with a strong interest and relevance in this activity, the Government will, of course, listen. And I will remind noble Lords that it is up to the Independent Monitoring Committee to raise any issues at any point. My Lords, the Government is satisfied that Rwanda is safe. I cannot, of course, predict what will happen in the future, but as I've set out, I can assure this House that we have already established the right mechanisms, so should a situation ever arise, the Government will respond as necessary. And this would include a range of options to respond to the circumstances, including any primary legislation as required. Therefore, my Lords, this amendment is not necessary. Turning to the motion in the name of the noble Lord Brown. As I have said previously, the Government greatly values the contribution of those who have supported us and our armed forces overseas, and that is why there are legal routes for them to come to the UK. On the 1st of February, the Ministry of Defence updated Parliament on developments relating to the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy, ARAP scheme, announcing a reassessment of decisions made on applications with credible links to Afghan specialist units. This followed the Ministry of Defence's review of processes around eligibility decisions for applicants claiming service in Afghan specialist units that demonstrated instances of inconsistent application of ARAP criteria in certain cases. We are taking necessary steps to ensure that ARAP criteria are applied consistently. As such, the Ministry of Defence has decided to undertake a reassessment of all eligibility decisions made on ineligible applications, with credible claims of links to Afghan specialist units. This reassessment is being done by a team which is independent of those who conducted the original casework. They will review each application thoroughly on a case-by-case basis. In existing legislation, including but not limited to the Illegal Migration Act, the Secretary of State has a range of powers to consider cases and specific categories of persons. I've already made clear and a clear commitment on behalf of His Majesty's Government that we will consider how removal under existing immigration legislation would apply. That means that once this review of ARAP decisions for those with credible links to Afghan specialist units has concluded, the Government will not remove to Rwanda those who have received a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review, where they are already in the UK as of today. The Government recognises the commitment and responsibility that comes with combat veterans, whether our own or those who showed courage by serving alongside us, and we will not let them down. My Lords, the Commons have considered and rejected these amendments 4 times. For the reasons I've set out, they are not necessary. We will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. We will not relocate people to Rwanda, and if circumstances change which impact upon the safety of the country,
just Lord Sharp.
And we will not
okay.
turn our backs on those who have supported our armed forces and the UK government. My Lords, illegal migration is costing billions of pounds and innocent lives are being lost. Bold, novel solutions are required, and our partnership with Rwanda offers just that. Rwanda is a safe country that has proven time and again its ability to offer asylum seekers a safe haven and a chance to build a new life. And I beg to move.
Is that motion A be agreed to? Motion A1, Lord Anderson of Ipswich.
My Lords, I beg to move motion A1 as an amendment to motion A at end insert, and do propose amendment 3J as an amendment in lieu. I do so in the unavoidable absence of the noble and learned Lord Hope of Craighead, who tabled the previous versions of Amendment 3 and who has been good enough to approve this one. We are in the end game now. We will, this week, have a law that provides for the offshore processing and settlement of asylum seekers in Rwanda. Its benefits remain to be seen. Its costs will be measured not only in money, but in principles debased, disregard for our international commitments, avoiding statutory protections for the vulnerable, and the removal of judicial scrutiny over the core issue of the safety of Rwanda. That is now a fact, and there is nothing more we can do about it. But there is a further principle, as precious as any of those, to which we can still hold fast. One might call it the principle of honesty in lawmaking. I presume on your Lordship's patience this evening, because we have it in our power to reinstate that principle without damaging the purpose of this bill or delaying its passage any further. We are concerned with the safety of Rwanda both in the present and in the future. This bill is honest about neither. The present position is governed by Clause 1(2) of the bill, which, and I quote, gives effect to the judgment of Parliament that Rwanda is a safe country. Yet there has been no statement, even by the government, that Rwanda is currently a safe country, as defined in Clause 1(5).
I thought it'd be worth saying the name of one of them if it was just one speaker. But if it's multiple, then I don't think there's much point, right?
Last Wednesday. We will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty. My Lords, this has not yet happened. Against the background of what the Supreme Court described on the evidence before it as, and I quote, the past and continuing practice of refoulement, those obligations include, by Article 10(3) of the treaty, the agreement of an effective system to ensure that refoulement no longer occurs. The Minister has repeatedly declined the invitations of the noble Lord Kerr to confirm that this system, a precondition for the safety of Rwanda, is fully set up and ready to go. Neither have we heard anything from the Monitoring Committee. So while the Minister's confidence is comforting up to a point, we are simply not in a position to make the judgment that this bill imputes to us. The bill's treatment of the future is still further from reality. Parliament is asked to declare that Rwanda will always be a safe country, even if the progress made since the genocide of the 1990s, and one can only commend Rwanda for that, should ever falter or go into reverse. Decision makers, immigration officials, courts, even the Secretary of State are bound by Clause 2 to treat Rwanda conclusively as safe in perpetuity. So bluntly, we are asked to be complicit in a present-day untruth and a future fantasy by making a factual judgment not backed by evidence, then by declaring that this judgment must stand for all time, irrespective of the true facts. This in the context not of some technical deeming provision in the tax code, but of a factual determination on a matter of huge controversy on which the safety of human beings will depend. This is a post-truth bill. To adapt a phrase we have often heard from the noble Lord Norton of Louth, it takes the culture of justification, which is the trademark of this House, and replaces it with a culture of assertion. It takes hopes and rebadges them as facts. It uses the sovereign status of this Parliament as a shield from scrutiny, and it makes a mockery of this bill. My amendment addresses first the present and then the future. The first part, subclause 1(7), requires the Secretary of State to tell us when, in his judgment, Rwanda is safe. It is this statement, not the judgment we are supposed to be reaching tonight, that will determine when the flights may lawfully begin. He has the detailed evidence on this. We, despite our best efforts, have had only scraps. In previous versions of the amendment, this ministerial statement on the safety of Rwanda has been conditional on a favourable opinion from the government's own monitoring committee, established under the treaty, which we are told is already operational and which is ideally placed to assess the evidence. It has been objected on previous occasions that the monitoring committee should have no more than an advisory role. Lord Hope and I have listened and revised this amendment, which now provides only for the monitoring committee to be consulted. The statement on safety would be purely for the Secretary of State. The noble and learned Lord Faulkner asked the Minister last Tuesday to confirm that, and I quote, "Before the government are satisfied that Rwanda is a safe country, they will seek the views of the monitoring committee." No such assurance was forthcoming. I cannot say why not. Perhaps we will get an assurance this evening. Failing that, this amendment would write one into law. The second part of my amendment, new subclause 8, deals with the future. Lord Hope pointed out the problem in these terms. No provision is made anywhere in the bill for what should happen if the facts change and everyone can see that Rwanda is no longer safe. Sir Jeremy Wright, Sir Bob Neill and Sir Robert Buckland, none of them lefty lawyers the last time I checked, have made the same point in the Commons debates. The Minister indicated last week that if the government thought Rwanda had become unsafe, there might be some unspecified parliamentary occasion to mark that development. But of course, no such occasion, other than the passage of a full Act of Parliament, could do the trick. That, I think, was effectively acknowledged by the Minister in the Commons this afternoon. This assumption of perpetual parliamentary infallibility is an embarrassment and a nonsense. Fortunately, there is an alternative which presents not the slightest threat to what the government is seeking to achieve. New subclause 8 would give the Secretary of State an untrammelled power to decide in the future that Rwanda is no longer a safe country. Such a decision would release all decision makers, including himself, from a legal fiction that makes the law look like an ass and those who make it asses. So, my lords, there is a speedy and effective way to reinstate the principle of honesty in lawmaking. To quote the parting words of Sir Robert Buckland, who rebelled this afternoon alongside Sir Jeremy Wright, "Sort this out now." I persist in the hope that reason may yet break out in the Minister's response. If it does not, I propose to test the opinion of the House. I beg to move.
The original question was that motion A be agreed to. Since when motion A1 has been moved as an amendment to motion A, at end insert the words "as printed on the marshalled list." The question, therefore, is that motion A1 be agreed to.
My Lords, I rise to speak to motion B1 and Amendment 10H in lieu. My Lords, I've given a great deal of thought in recent times to this question of what courage and strength looks like. So I ask myself today, is it a desperate and unpopular Prime Minister threatening to keep some of us septuagenarians up all night if we do not bow to his will? Or is it putting yourself and your family in mortal peril by fighting totalitarianism alongside British forces with no idea of how that struggle will end? I know which I consider to be brave and strong, and I believe that the overwhelming majority of your lordships, like others of whatever age or political persuasion up and down the United Kingdom, agree. For weeks, ministers have toured the TV and radio studios saying that to repay our debt of honour to those who served the Crown in Afghanistan in particular would let some floodgates of application open. Well, my Lords, if the concession I seek would open such floodgates, creating oceans of impostors, this would only be as a result of the government's own incompetence and lack of preparation. And it's incompetence as well as dishonour that has brought us here this evening. Yeah. In the summer of 2021, the former Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab told us in a statement to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that Her Majesty's Government was developing a plan for the evacuation of our exposed allies and agents from Afghanistan. If you'll allow me a moment to get this part of my script, I'll read the exact words to him. He told the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in July 2021 the government were planning for the possibility of an evacuation of British citizens and those who were quite rightly entitled to think that we had a moral obligation to secure their lives. I remember, in fact, post-Operation Pitting, asking if someone would share that plan to me to see if the plan included the very reality that those who were sent to help people evacuate left before those who needed to be evacuated could be. My Lords, later we were told by the Prime Minister, with a statement repeated in your Lordship's House. The statement was repeated in your Lordship's House, and I read now from the Hansard of Tuesday the 7th September, where the statement in its full is set out. Later, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in this statement, told your Lordships that the Taliban must ensure safe passage and that Her Majesty's Government would keep ongoing evacuation plans under review in respect of just such people. In fact, he said this: "Let me say to anyone to whom we have made commitments and who is currently in Afghanistan, we are working urgently with our friends in the region to secure safe passage. And as soon as routes are available, we will do everything possible to help you reach safety." That's the words of the Prime Minister that were repeated here. And in fact, when this particular statement was repeated in your Lordship's House, we were then told also that this plan had been in existence for most of that year and that it had been reviewed in January and was repeatedly reviewed in order that the chaos that we saw at the Kabul airport would not happen, but it did. My Lords, you would have thought, with all of that planning behind, all of that information, with the fact that we had recruited the triples, that we had trained them, and that we paid them out of the embassy in Kabul, you would have thought that the 2,000 people who made them up, who were the most at risk, who had been working for us in harm's way, would have been known about, recorded and evacuated, and it would be the simplest thing in the world to triage anybody who claimed to be of that group out of the process of ARAP. But that's not how it turned out. Instead, a great many were left behind, and so the disastrous evacuation plan of 2021 continues. My Lords, the government created this problem that has caused at least 9 of those who fought for us to be executed by the Taliban, because promised safe passage never appeared. Her Majesty's government told us even last week that there would be no concession in respect of those people who had come here because they were frightened of their lives and were entitled to be frightened of their lives and to find a way of getting here if there was no safe passage. So why no concession for so long? I'm asked this question every day. Every day since I started debating this issue, I'm asked by many people, including many Conservative politicians, why no concession? Why have they not been able to work something out with you, they say to me. Why the delay? Either they have no confidence in their ability to implement this plan and are seeking in some way to delay it that's not their responsibility, or they just want the theatre of delay to their flagship bill to blame Labour, the Lords, the courts and so on. Today, they finally bring a concession, having offered and then withdrawn it last week. They refuse to put it in the face of the bill. And I break away now because, my Lords, I'm going to ask the Noble Lord the Minister if he will either reread the passage of his speech that I call a concession. I know he doesn't, but that I call a concession, and he will read it a bit more slowly to your Lordship's House so that you can understand what the implications of it are. If not, if he has a printed copy, I'll read it slowly. I invite him to read it again, please. Would you do it now? Because it's important to the rest of my speech.
I will. With the leave of the House, I will read it very slowly. That means that once this review of ARAP decisions for those with credible links to Afghan specialist units has concluded, the government will not remove to Rwanda those who received a positive eligibility decision as a result of this review, where they are already in the UK as of today.
Already in the UK. Well, you cannot be removed and deported to Rwanda unless you are here by what the government call illegal means, but what I call irregular means. So, my Lords, those words are important for this reason. The Noble Lord, the Minister, does not believe this to be a concession. It is to him a restatement of what he has been telling us for some time, but in a different form. It is, my Lords, quite clearly, in my view, a concession, although I guarantee you now that the media out there are being briefed that it's not, because there can be no concessions with this bill. But let me tell you why it's a concession. In the report stage of the debates in your Lordship's House on this bill, on the 4th of March, at column 1421, I asked this question of the Noble Lord the Minister. Will the Minister answer the question I asked in February when this review was announced, meaning the Triples review of eligibility to ARAP? Will anyone who is eligible but was told they were ineligible and acted in a way in which a small number of them did in extremis to protect themselves from possible death be disqualified from being allowed to become eligible on review? Will they be excluded from the requirement of the Illegal Migration Act and this bill, if it becomes law, that they must be deported to Rwanda? The Noble Lord answered for the first time he was in a position to do so. I think he said, I understand they will be deported to Rwanda. Now they will not be. Now that is a concession in anybody's language.
Absolutely.
Until then. And it is an extremely important concession, because these are the small number of people that in every speech I have made in support of my amendment, I have said that are the target of my ambition, that they will not be deported. So today we they finally bring a concession, having offered the name withdrawn. So should I trust them at their word? They left these people behind. They messed up any subsequent evacuation plan. This is the third opportunity competently to do the right thing. Why should I trust them now? I'll tell you, my Lords, why I am minded to consider doing so, although I haven't yet made up my mind. Because we, my Lords, are now part of a grand coalition, including noble and gallant lords, many very senior politicians and officials who have secured this country for years, who have put their names to this, veterans, campaigners, and so many voters of all persuasions and traditions across our nations, and we will not be silent until today's promise is honoured by this government or the next one. Finally, my lords, what does this ignominious history tell us about the Rwanda policy as a whole? There were no safe routes for those heroes to whom we owe a debt of honour. Still less are there safe routes for any other genuine refugees worthy of the promise of the Refugee Convention, also paid for in courage and strength in an earlier war so many years ago. So while I may not press my motion this evening, I look forward to the day when a Labour government repeals this immoral and unlawful excuse for legislation in total.
My Lords, it's a privilege to follow the noble Lord, Lord Brown of Ladyton.
I still hear the broadcast. So that was via Labour peer Lord Brown of Ladyton speaking there in the House of Lords on the Rwanda bill. If a vote ends up happening on any of the amendments during the time of this broadcast, which is unlikely with 15 minutes to go, we will bring it here, but we will continue on with the rest of the stories right now. The next story is staying within the UK. A report warns that high UK interest rates could add billions to green energy transition. The Resolution Foundation has warned that a permanent shift to higher interest rates could add billions of pounds to the UK's renewable energy transition. Borrowing costs have soared since the easing of pandemic lockdowns and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as the world's leading central banks raised interest rates to tackle inflation, pushing up the cost of investment in infrastructure across advanced economies, including for green power generation schemes. The Resolution Foundation said £29 billion a year could therefore be added to household energy bills in 2050 in a scenario where interest rates persist at current elevated levels, relative to a situation where borrowing costs return to pre-pandemic levels. However, it said the green transition would still save consumers billions of pounds compared with current sky-high energy costs, and slowing down the pace of transition was not an option. The think tank said a fourfold increase in investment in the UK's power sector was required to provide the crucial next step in decarbonising the UK economy, and a plan was needed to fund this investment in case interest rates stayed at current high levels. Its report comes amid a pushback against green policies by right-wing politicians who argue the costs of hitting net zero are too high. Labour earlier this year slashed its green investment plans amid concerns over high borrowing costs and a campaign by the Conservatives to weaponise the affordability of its £28 billion price tag. £80 billion price tag. However, the Resolution Foundation said the green transition remained vital, despite the higher costs of investment. Decarbonising the power sector is key to tackling global heating, it said, and would also help to reduce the UK's dependence on volatile fossil fuel supplies, which risked exposing households to global energy shocks of the kind witnessed after the Russian invasion. For our next story, a Glasgow MP is to lead a debate calling for a food poverty strategy. The SNP's Chris Stevens MP will lead a debate in the House of Commons today, calling on the UK government to urgently introduce a food insecurity strategy to address rising levels of hunger across the UK. Mr. Stevens has said that the current social security system is insufficient and that the UK government must end the cruel sanctions and deduction system, as well as abolishing the two-child cap and associated rape clause. He also called for the UK government to work with devolved administrations and local authorities to identify and register all vulnerable households for food programmes. After setting up the Good Food Scotland programme, which serves 2,000 members across Glasgow with fresh and nutritious foods, Mr. Stevens wants to expand this network to eliminate food poverty across Scotland. Commenting, SNP MP Chris Stevens said, Westminster's cruel social security system, combined with the Tories' austerity measures and the unmitigated impact of Brexit, have led to a cycle of poverty and inequality across these isles. Households in Scotland have been unable to do anything but watch as cost of living soars, while those with powers to effect real change and reverse the economic harm created by Brexit sit on their hands at Westminster. The SNP Scottish Government has led the way on tackling poverty through progressive policies like the Scottish Child Payment, but for every step we take forward, Westminster is dragging Scotland back by imposing cruel welfare cuts and austerity measures. Mr. Stevens ended by saying that this shows why it is vital that a stronger team of SNP MPs are elected at general election to stand up for Scotland's values and demand action to reduce poverty. Next story, Scottish Parliament's Health, Social Care and Sport Committees backs a buffer zones bill. The Scottish Parliament's Health, Social Care and Sport Committees have backed the principles of a Safe Access Zones Bill introduced by Scottish Greens MSP Gillian Mackay as a members' bill. The committee report has been welcomed by Ms. Mackay as a key milestone in securing protections for people accessing abortion services. That's Ms. Mackay. This is seen as a key milestone in securing protections for people accessing abortion services. The bill will create 200-meter access zones or buffer zones to stop anti-choice campaign groups from protesting outside abortion service providers. Ms. Mackay said, "I am very grateful to members of the committee and to everyone who gave evidence. We will now take the time to reflect on the committee's recommendations ahead of Stage 2. They will help to ensure that this will be the strongest and most robust bill it can be. Some of the testimonies and stories that we have heard through the process have been really heartbreaking and harrowing. The impact on patients and staff has been devastating. Nobody should ever be targeted and harassed in this way, and especially not when they are accessing healthcare. Buffer zones are an important step in expanding reproductive rights in Scotland, and this is a key milestone in delivering them. I hope that all MSPs take the same positive and constructive approach as the committee and vote for the bill at Stage 2. End quote. The next story, the global defense budget jumps to a record high of $2,440 billion. That's $2,440 billion. Global military expenditure has reached a record high of $2,440 billion after the largest annual rise in government spending on arms in over a decade, according to a report. The 6.8% increase between 2022 and 23 was the steepest since 2009, pushing spending to the highest recorded by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, in its 60-year history. For the first time, analysts of the think tank recorded a rise in military outlay in all 5 geographical regions: Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Asia and Oceania, and the Americas. Nan Tian, a senior researcher with SIPRI's military expenditure and arms production program, warned that the heightened risk of an unintended conflagration as governments raced to arm. He said the unprecedented rise in military spending is a direct response to the global deterioration in peace and security. The 2 largest spenders, the United States, 37%, and China, 12%, made up around half of global military spending, increasing their expenditure by 2.3% and 6% respectively. The US government has spent 9.4% more on research, development, test, and evaluation than in 2022, as Washington sought to stay at the forefront of technological developments. Since 2014, when Russia first invaded Crimea and the eastern Donbas region of Ukraine, the US has been shifting its focus from counterinsurgency operations and asymmetric warfare to developing new weapon systems that could be used in a potential conflict with adversaries with advanced military capabilities. End quote. According, and this was according to the Cypriot report. While dwarfed by the US in military spending, China, as the second largest, biggest spender, allocated an estimated $296 billion in 2023, an increase of 6% on 2022. It has consistently increased defense spending over the past 29 years, although the biggest growth periods were in the 90s and between 2003 and 2014. The single-digit growth figure of last year reflected China's more modest economic approach in recent times, according to Cypriot. Russia, India, Saudi Arabia, and the UK, the largest spender in the UK being the largest spender in Central and Western Europe, after a 7.9% year-on-year increase, follow the previous two countries on Cypriot's league tables. Expenditure in the Middle East rose by 9% to an estimated $200 billion, making it the region with the highest military spend as a proportion of GDP in the world at 4.2%, followed by Europe at 2.8%, Africa at 1.9%, Asia and Oceania at 1.7%, and the Americas at 1.2%. The military expenditure of Israel, second behind Saudi Arabia in the region, but ahead of Turkey, grew by 24% to reach $27.5 billion, driven mainly by its offensive in Gaza. Iran was the fourth largest military spender in the Middle East. Its spending went up marginally, a plus of 0.6% to $10.3 billion. Cypriot said the share of total military spending allocated to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had been increasing since at least 2019. Ukraine became the world's eighth biggest military spender in 2023, with an annual rise of 51% to reach $64.8 billion, still only equivalent to 59% of Russia's military spending that year. Our next story takes a look at America, where the Trump trial prosecutors say hush money was election fraud, pure and simple. In its opening statement in the UK president's in the opening statement in the ex-president's hush money trial today, prosecutors said that Donald Trump orchestrated a criminal scheme to corrupt the 2016 presidential election by covering up an alleged affair with the adult film star Stormy Daniels. A jury of 7 men and 5 women living in Manhattan will consider whether Trump's alleged efforts to conceal an affair with Daniels, which he feared would damage his 2016 election bid, was illicit. Trump was charged in the spring of 2023 with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. The case, brought by the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, hinges on a $130,000 payment that Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, made to Daniels to keep her story under wraps. Bragg contends that Trump masked the true nature of the payments in business records by describing them as lawful legal expenses. In his opening statement today, the prosecutor Matthew Colangelo told jurors that Trump invited his friend David Pecker, the head of the National Enquirer's publisher, AMI, to a meeting in summer of 2015, at which Colangelo said Trump and Pecker hatched a plan to keep damaging information about Trump out of the press during the 2016 election campaign. According to the prosecution, Pecker agreed to run damaging information in the National Enquirer about opponents, including an item claiming, falsely, that Senator Ted Cruz had family connections to the JFK assassination, as well as buying up negative stories for the express purpose of preventing them from being published. Colangelo said this catch-and-kill campaign was geared towards helping Trump's 2016 election campaign. He mentioned on earlier payments to Karen McDougal, the Playboy model who claimed to have had an affair with Trump. Pecker will also testify that $150,000 was way more than AMI would normally pay for this kind of story, but he discussed it with Donald Trump and he discussed it with Michael Cohen, and he agreed on the deal with understanding that Trump would find a way to pay AMI back, Colangelo said. The company coordinated directly with a candidate, he continued. Colangelo also read out the transcript of Trump's infamous comments caught on a hot mic on the set of the Access Hollywood's television show, where Trump bragged he could sexually assault women because he was famous. The prosecution said that Michael Cohen was tasked with handling a payoff to Stormy Daniels for $130,000, which Trump is alleged to have repaid to him after the election in checks that were listed in business records as for legal services. Colangelo said that it was a lie. Cohen, who pleaded guilty in 2018, is expected to be one of the prosecution's star witnesses. Trump has denied having a sexual encounter with Daniels and insists payments to Cohen were above-board legal expenses. The New York City case is just one of several criminal proceedings against Trump. Back to Scotland, where the Scottish Government announces a ban on wet wipes containing plastic. The supply and sale of wet wipes containing plastic will be banned across the UK following overwhelming support during public consultation, with 95% of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing with the proposals. Measures have been set out in a joint response by all 4 UK nations published today, including a transition period for businesses to help them prepare. Scottish ministers will introduce regulations by the end of 2024, with a ban due to come into force 18 months later. Wet wipes containing plastic do not biodegrade in the natural environment and persist for many years, which may cause harm to wildlife and environment, and are a source of unsightly litter or of microplastic pollution. The ban builds up work already undertaken by the Scottish Government to tackle a suite of problematic and unnecessary sources of plastic litter, especially where non-plastic alternatives exist and are readily available. This includes the introduction of a carrier bag charge in 2014, the ban on plastic-stemmed cotton buds in 2019, and the ban on a variety of single-use plastic food and beverage items in 2022. Plastic-free wet wipes are readily available, and several retailers have already stopped selling wet wipes containing plastic. Minister for Green Skills, Circular Economy and Biodiversity, Lorna Slater, said, "I am delighted to confirm today that the Scottish Government will ban wet wipes containing plastic. These items are a problematic source of marine litter and are a threat to the health of our environment and wildlife. This ban delivers on an important commitment made in our marine litter strategy and builds on previous actions to ban unnecessary single-use plastic items such as plastic-stemmed cotton buds and plastic straws and cutlery." For our last story, the Scottish Government consent for 6 renewable projects ahead. For our second last story, the Scottish Government consent for 6 renewables projects ahead of contracts for difference allocation round 6. 6 developments projects have been given consent ahead of a contracts for difference allocation round 6 application window, which closed on Friday, 19th April. These projects are, first being Greenvolt Offshore Wind Farm Limited, the Greenvolt Offshore Wind Farm INTOG leasing round. Second being the Highland Wind Limited Pentland Floating Offshore Wind Farm, offshore wind. Third being the Simply Blue Energy, Orkney Limited, Core Power Wave Energy Converters, Wave Energy. Fourth being the Orbital E-Day 3 and Orbital E-Day 4, two tidal energy projects. Fifth being Nova, Ocean Star and Sea Star, two tidal energy projects. Fifth being Magellanes, Renovables, Magellanes Atir Platforms for tidal energy. Commenting on the projects, First Minister Hamza Yusuf said, "It is great news that we have been able to consent for the first project in the Crown Estate Scotland's Innovation and Targeted Oil and Gas INTOJ leasing round. This is a significant milestone which will help secure Scotland's place at the forefront of floating wind technology. Scotland is one of the best places in the world to develop offshore wind and its supply chain, and we are determined to maximise the huge economic opportunity offshore wind can bring. We have already underlined our commitment to make Scotland a global leader in offshore wind by committing to invest up to £500 million over 5 years to catalyse private investment in the infrastructure and manufacturing facilities critical to the growth of the sector. Investor confidence in Scotland's renewable sector is growing, as illustrated by significant investments in ScotWind leasing rounds and in ports and supply chain infrastructure facilities that will enable the sector to develop. We have a strong record in developing robust consents, ensuring the right projects are built in the right place at the right time. Ahead of the allocation round 6, AR6, application windows are closing. The relevant consents and marine licenses were issued for 2 floating offshore wind projects, as well as 1 wave and 3 tidal energy developments, allowing all to go forward. The SNP's Energy Security and Net Zero spokesperson, Dave Dugan, MP, welcomed the consent for an offshore floating wind project off the coast of Aberdeenshire and other energy consents granted by the Scottish Government. Marine Scotland's consent to the Greenvolt offshore wind farm will unlock around £3 billion of investment, generate hundreds of jobs, and will result in Europe's first commercial-scale floating wind development. Next story is a casket believed to have belonged to Mary, Queen of Scots, to go on tour. The silver casket, believed to have been owned by Mary, Queen of Scots, and which was acquired by the National Museum Scotland in 2022, has undergone fresh conservation work ahead of going on tour in Kirkcudbright and Stirling. Kirkcudbright. That's Kirkcudbright and Stirling. This iconic piece of Scotland's national heritage will go on display in Kirkcudbright galleries from the 2nd of October 2024 to the 27th of April 2025, then at Stirling Smith Art Gallery and Museum from 30th of April to 31st of August 25. To prepare the casket for the tour, centuries of tarnish and corrosion have been removed. The technique of electrolytic reduction was used via a pen-like device, allowing the delicate gold and silver surfaces to be cleaned in a highly controlled and targeted manner without the need for any abrasive polishing. The casket was made in Paris, probably between 1493 and 1510, and is a superb and extremely rare work of early French silver, very little of which survives, even in France. It is likely that its long-standing association with Mary has kept it preserved for over 450 years. It is thought that the casket was given to Mary by her first husband, Francois II of France, and came to Scotland with her in 1561, after his death in 1560. Her inventories from this time list multiple examples of precious jewellery and other such valuable objects. For 3 centuries, it was owned by the family of the Dukes of Hamilton, following its acquisition around 1674 by Anne, Duchess of Hamilton. According to a handwritten note stored with it from the late 17th century, she bought the casket, previously owned by Mary, Marchioness of Douglas, on the understanding that it had belonged to Mary, Queen of Scots. The note records the belief that this is the casket which played a dramatic role in Mary's downfall, when in December 1568 a similar casket was produced at a hearing ordered by Elizabeth I against Mary at Westminster. This contained what have become known as the casket letters. These love poems and letters allegedly from Mary to her third husband, the Earl of Bothwell, implicated them both in a conspiracy to murder her second husband, Lord Darnley. The authorities of letters remained a subject of debate, but it is widely thought that they were doctored. Following the hearing at Westminster, Mary, Queen of Scots, remained in English captivity for 19 years until she was executed in 1587. Well, that wraps us up for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you could afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make monthly regular payments, thank you very much. Our focus must now move to securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. I was Patryk Witkowski, and I look forward to catching you in the next broadcast. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
And those who don't. Whereas I've made the case continually, as every member across this chamber has done, that we all agree that we need to stop the boats. The dispute in this place is to exactly the right way to go about that and the way to do that. And that's the important distinction that lies between us. We believe that the bill as it stands is inconsistent with the principles and traditions of our country, and as such that's why we oppose it, and various arguments have been made. The argument has never been about, never have I stood at this dispatch box and at any time said to the noble Lord Sharp or Lord Stewart, or indeed to the government chief whip, or indeed the leader of the House, that we will block the bill. That has never been the policy of His Majesty's opposition, never been something that we have said from this dispatch box. And indeed, we voted against a motion that was put before it some weeks ago to do that. But what we've also said is that we will stand up for the proper position of this House, the proper role of this chamber, to argue, to debate, to revise, to suggest amendments, and to put forward that case. And I would just say to the noble Lord Sharp, I hope he's in a position in a few months' time where he stood here doing exactly the same as I am, being as frustrating, as challenging as I'm trying to be to him, because that's the proper role of the House of Lords. And therefore it's important that we do that. And it has been made, I can't remember which noble lord, if the government was as worried about delay as they say they would, why on earth didn't they sort all this out before Easter, when all their own side was whipped to be here on a Monday after we debated on the Wednesday, only to have a further email go out to say that is no longer the case and you will no longer be required. That's how much of an emergency legislation it was. The government could have cleared this before Easter, and yet they didn't, presumably because the Prime Minister couldn't guarantee that everything was in order for the bill to work. So let's not talk about this House of Lords delaying the legislation. Let's look at the government's timetabling of its own business and its inability to actually get that right. And even today, the government, in a press conference to the lobby, as I understand it, couldn't give any detail of the numbers it expects to be subject to the provisions of this treaty, the numbers of flights they expect, or indeed the exact date when it will take place. Never either has it been an argument about the questioning about the integrity of this chamber. I do not believe there is a single member of this Parliament, whether it's in the other place or in this chamber, or indeed of any of the journalists who report our proceedings, who have not got proper integrity. And I would not have gone on the radio, as a government minister did this morning, and accused this House of bordering on racism with the way that it debated the Rwanda treaty. That is a shocking, appalling comment to make. I don't believe that's what Lord Sharp says. I don't think anybody in here has actually been bordering on racism in anything that they've said. I've heard detailed argument, detailed positions espoused by many, but nobody in here, or indeed I believe any other place, or anybody who reports on these proceedings has been anywhere near racist or racism. There is a legitimate difference of view, but we should not resort to those sorts of things being said. I also object, and I do object to this, and the Prime Minister did it again this morning when he suggested that those of us who opposed the Rwanda bill before us lacked compassion, that somehow there wasn't anybody who wasn't opposed to the drownings, who wasn't opposed to some of the appalling things that we see. Of course we're all opposed to that. There isn't a single individual in this chamber, in the press, in the other place, who doesn't abhor some of that which takes place. But that is the context within which we have been debating this. So we're quite right to turn round and say that we are quite right to look at what Lord Anderson is saying, what my noble friend Lord Brown has said. It's not just about Labour peers. Again, the Prime Minister goes on, and we hear other people. Labour is blocking this. Labour peers are blocking. We haven't got a majority in here to block anything. We have to have the support of crossbenchers. Tory peers abstaining or disappearing. The Liberal Democrats voting with us. Everybody else. It's not about Labour peers. It's about people, Greens, sorry, Baroness Jones. It's about being at a wedding. You know you're going to miss somebody out. And you go through all the aunts and uncles, all the relatives, and you see the glower of Aunt Mabel from the back. Not that that's you, Baroness Jones. Where have you gone? You're not sitting in your... Thank you. But no, seriously, and the Greens, of course. But look, let me just say this. It's about all of us who believe that the bill is wrong, standing together. And that is why it's important. And if Lord Anderson chooses to put his amendment A1 to the vote, of course we'll support that. And we're pleased to support it because it's a sensible amendment. It doesn't block the bill. It simply says to the government, let the monitoring committee that you yourself have set up say to the Secretary of State, who can then make a statement to Parliament saying Rwanda is safe. But it also gives the government a get-out clause by saying in the future you can actually, just the Secretary of State, presumably on the advice of the monitoring committee, can say that Rwanda is not safe. Whereas in the bill at the moment it's compelled to, whatever happens, to believe it is safe. Perfectly sensible amendment A1. Let me come to my noble friend Lord Brown's amendment. And I do think it's a meaningful concession on the part of the government. I do. And I think that is really important statement to make. And let me say this to all those who are listening. When they question why it's important sometimes that the Lord stands firm, why it's important that sometimes the Lord challenges the government of the day, whatever government there is, why it says to the government, you've got this wrong and you need to think again, why tenacious Lords, and in this case the brilliance of my noble friend Lord Brown in what he's done. The reason is because sometimes the government gives way, and that's what's happened. If we hadn't have pushed this last week, this concession would not have happened. If we'd have given way 2 months ago, this concession wouldn't have happened. So far from this being about the Lords blocking anything or delaying anything, it is the Lords performing its proper constitutional function and bringing about change from the government. And that is what it's about. And it's done in a way, frankly, which actually gets the government itself out of a bind, because we know that many on the government, not only from their own backbenches, but on their front bench, including many in this chamber, they themselves thought what the Prime Minister, one presumes, was saying was wrong. And they needed the Prime Minister to change his position. So the strength of what was proposed in this chamber by my noble friend Lord Brown forced the Prime Minister, and we presume that he supports all of this, forced the Prime Minister to change his mind and to come forward with that concession. And the concession that the noble Lord Sharp is read out is significant, it's important, and is something that my noble friend Lord Brown can be proud of. It may not be everything that everybody would want, but sometimes in politics you have to do what you can and achieve what you can. And in the face of what my noble friend faced, where it was absolute refusal by the government to make any concession at all, the Prime Minister standing in Downing Street and saying he will not change a single word of this bill has now been proved to be false in the sense that Lord Brown and your lordships have changed the government. And let me just finish with this. The importance of this cannot be understated, because what your lordships have done in forcing the government to rethink, with the support, to be fair, of the front bench, right across the front bench there, means that people who fought with our country, stood shoulder to shoulder with our armed forces, who would have been subject to deportation to Rwanda, will now be exempt from the provisions of that bill. That is a significant change in what the government was saying, and it will mean that some people, either who would have had their rights ignored, or frankly who will be coming to this country in due course through the Arab scheme, would have died, would have not been able to survive. And that is the significance of what Lord Brown has achieved with the support of your lordships. It's your lordship's house at its finest. The government forced to concede in a way that it should have done before, but we should not underestimate the fact that the government has made an important concession, and as such we welcome it.
Well, my lords, as ever, can I thank all noble lords who've contributed to this relatively short debate. I will deal with the points in order of how they were made, and I'll start with the noble Lord Anderson, if I may, and with whom I'm afraid I'm going to have to respectfully disagree. I do not believe we have debased our principles. I believe we've upheld them. We've upheld the principle of the integrity of our sovereign borders, the principle of not ceding our immigration policy to criminal gangs, the principle to safeguard lives and deter, of course, dangerous and illegal channel crossings. That is the point of this bill, has always been the point of this bill, and it deserves to be restated. My lords, going back to my opening remarks, things have progressed since we were last discussing these matters, and I shall repeat them for the record. On the 19th of April, the Rwandan Parliament passed their domestic legislation to implement their new asylum system. The new Rwandan asylum law will strengthen and streamline key aspects of the end-to-end asylum system, in particular decision-making processes and associated appeals processes. I'm very grateful to my noble friend Lord Hodgson for reminding us of Rwanda's high standing in the international league tables. But I think things could not be clearer. There has been significant progress towards many of the things that the noble lord is actually asking for. And that, of course, includes with the monitoring committee, and I'll repeat this too. If the monitoring committee were to raise or escalate any issues to the Joint Committee, where standing members of the Joint Committee are senior officials of the Government of the UK and the Government of Rwanda, with responsibility for areas related to the partnership or areas with a strong interest and relevance in this activity, the government will, of course, listen. And I would remind noble lords that this is up to the independent monitoring committee to raise issues at every point. My lords, the future is not fantasy, as has been alleged. As is well known, the government is satisfied that Rwanda is safe, and we have acknowledged that we can't predict what will happen in the future. But as I also set out, we can assure the House that we have already established the right mechanisms, so should a situation ever arise, the government will respond as necessary. And I repeat, this would include a range of options to respond to the circumstances, including any primary legislation as required. My lords, we don't regard this, as the noble and learned Lord Carlisle asserted, as inexplicable. We regard this amendment as unnecessary. My lords, turning to the noble Lord Brown's amendment, I'm not going to get into the semantics of what this is or is not. What it actually is the right thing to do. I would say to the noble Lord Jermyn, in his remarks, he seems to have missed the entire point of the bill. The simple answer to his question is: do not come here illegally. There will be no possible pull factors There is a safe and legal route available to those in Afghanistan who have served and can prove their eligibility under ARAP, and over 15,000 people have already availed themselves of it. My Lords, the Noble Lord and Noble and Learned Lord Carlisle raised the issue of Passover, and I heard what he said very carefully. The start of Passover was considered and very much understood, and we completely understand the Noble Lord's concerns, but ultimately scheduling decisions are made with a variety of different factors in mind. But I do hear what he said. My Lords, I will also go back to the fact that stopping the boats is not an idle boast. It's actually in the introduction to this very bill. And I repeat for the record, the purpose of this Act is to prevent and deter unlawful migration, and in particular migration by unsafe and illegal routes, by enabling the removal of persons to the Republic of Rwanda under provision made by or under the Immigration Acts. The purpose is not an idle boast, it is on the face of the bill. My Lords, also as regards refoulement, which again the Noble Lord German referred to, no relocated, this is in the treaty, no relocated individual, even if they do not make an application for asylum or humanitarian protection, or whatever the outcome of their applications, shall be removed from Rwanda except to the United Kingdom in accordance with Article 11.1. That's Article 10.3 of the treaty. The treaty, when it is ratified, it needs to be ratified before the bill comes into effect. So I would say to the Noble Lord, that is when we will see the provisions being acted upon. So, my Lords, as I said earlier, the Commons have considered and rejected these amendments now 4 times, and for the reasons I've set out, they are not necessary. We will only ratify the treaty once we agree with Rwanda that all the necessary implementation is in place for both countries to comply with the obligations under the treaty, including refoulement. We will not relocate people to Rwanda if circumstances change which impact upon the safety of the country. We will not turn our backs on those who supported our armed forces and the UK government. My Lords, I would say to the Noble Lord Coker, who I'm going to struggle not to think of as the Lord of Indiana Jones from now on, but I hope he is obviously not in his place in a few months' time. I'm not in his place in a few months' time. Couldn't read my own writing, my Lords. But I of course respect his right, which he frequently deploys to make my life difficult, and he does. My Lord, seriously, illegal migration is costing billions of pounds, and innocent lives are being lost. Bold, novel solutions are required, and our partnership with Rwanda offers just that. Rwanda is a safe country that has proven time and again its ability to offer asylum seekers a safe haven and a chance to build a new life. I beg to move.
Before the Noble Lord sits down, would he deal with one piece of nitty-gritty? Would he tell us a little bit more about the contract that apparently has reached with an airline?
I would say to the Noble and Learned Lord, no, I won't. That's about an operational matter. We are discussing the amendments in ping-pong.
I thank all Noble Lords who have spoken to my motion A1. 2 short points, if I may, in response. First, to the Noble Lord Hodgson of Astley Abbots, who knows how much I appreciate the work he does in this House and its committees. A vote for this amendment is not a vote for delay. It simply gives the Secretary of State a power to declare Rwanda safe, having consulted his monitoring committee. He could do that tomorrow if he had the evidence for it. And if he does not have the evidence for it, how can he expect us to do it tonight? Secondly, to the Noble Lord the Minister, I thank him for his measured response, not to mention the best laugh of the evening, and for the additional scrap of information concerning the Rwandan law, I assume the asylum law, that he says was passed on Friday. I'm afraid it's the first I've heard of that. I don't know how many of us in the House have had an opportunity to study that law. But he knows that these scraps fall very far short of the comprehensive picture that we would need if we were seriously to make our own judgment that Rwanda is safe, and that the concerns identified by the Supreme Court and by our own International Agreements Committee in great detail only in January have been satisfied. My Lords, in a less frenetic political environment, this common sense amendment, or something very like it, could, I am sure, have been hammered out between sensible people around a table. Sadly, that does not appear to be the world that we are in. I'm afraid I see no alternative to pressing motion A1 and to testing the opinion of the House.
The question is that motion A1 be agreed to. As many of that opinion will say content. The contrary, not content. The question will be decided by a division, and I'll advise the House when voting is open. Voting is now open. Clear the bar. The question is that motion A1 be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. Not content. The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. question is that motion A1 be agreed to. There have voted content 240, not content 211.
Speaking in English.
Motion B, Lord Sharp.
Spoke in English. I could understand it.
Lords, I've already spoken to motion B that this House do not insist on its amendment 10F, to which the Commons have disagreed for their reason 10G. I beg to move.
Lord Brown. So the question is that motion B be agreed to.
No.
Lord Brown.
It's a motion. I'm not moving. Not move. You've got to withdraw it. You moved.
The question is that motion B be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. To the contrary, not content. The contents have it. We move now to a question for short debate, and I think we should have a brief moment while members take their places.
Another region. Rainbows also funds 2 clinical nursing specialists working in the Leicester Royal Infirmary. In addition, they provide paediatric palliative care single point of contact, which is a pilot and is currently funded by the Paediatric Palliative Care Network, although future of this funding is not guaranteed. Furthermore, Rainbows provide end-of-life care, symptom control and short breaks at their hospice in Loughborough. Their therapists offer support in the hospital and they provide ongoing bereavement support to families. I am told that in total in 24-25 it will cost Rainbows £12.1 million to provide their services. Over the same period they will receive roughly £1.7 million in statutory funding, which works out to be around 14% of their costs, only enough to keep Rainbows open for 7 weeks. They will also receive £99,000 from Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland ICB and £1.4 million from Children's Hospice Grant for all 5 counties. This income totals £3.2 million, leaving a shortfall of £8.9 million, which Rainbows has to try and find itself. Furthermore, regarding the Children's Hospice Grant, while Rainbows has been told that they will receive this for 2024-25, the ICB has still not confirmed that they will receive the funding in subsequent years. Together for Short Lives has also highlighted that while ICBs and hospices are now clearer about their process for distributing the grant, thanks to the confirmation from the government, it still remains unclear when hospices will receive the funding from ICBs, as well as how and to what extent NHS England will hold ICBs to account in making sure this money is paid out. As a result, at the moment, hospices do not have the reassurance of a long-term NHS-funded plan, and so I would seek clarification from the Minister on these points. While Rainbows are fantastic at fundraising, the position they are currently in is simply not sustainable, particularly given that the number of children with life-limiting or life-threatening conditions is increasing. If we restrict the services existing hospices provide by not supporting them with adequate funding, this provision will have to be found elsewhere and responsibility will likely fall to the state. I would therefore encourage the Government and NHS England to accept Together for Short Lives' recommendation to review children's palliative care funding going forward and fill the £295
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.